wrestling fans, and welcome to the JJ Dillon podcast. I am your co-host, JP John Paz, and with me, as always, is the star of the show, two-time Hall of Famer, the leader of the Four Horsemen, the second greatest manager of all time, former WWF and WCW executive, James J. Dillon. JJ, how are you doing this evening?
John, great to talk with you, and boy, the weeks just fly by, but I look forward to this time. I really do enjoy the conversation.
Man, they are flying by, and this is really technically episode 9, and we're actually going to be talking about WrestleMania 8, Indianapolis, Indiana. Huge show, but JJ, last week we kind of touched on and dabbled on it a little bit. Pat Patterson going on hiatus, Terry Garvin getting fired. So much craziness is going on around WrestleMania 8, and it all involves you, or is going to involve you pretty much.
Yeah, I was one of the players, and when I first basically joined the creative team, it was Pat and myself working in the office during the week, and then all the creative was done on the weekends in a relaxed atmosphere at Vince's home. Summertime out by the pool, and he had like a covered cabana with a bank of phones. Oftentimes, I watched Stephanie with her girlfriends playing and splashing in the pool, and when the weather got a little bit cooler, we would actually convene in Vince's formal dining room, and it would be long days. That many of those weekend nights, that they wouldn't, because I lived about probably 45 minutes from there. And they had a beautiful home in Greenwich, and of course I spent many of those nights, with dinner at their table breaking bread. So it was a time of fond memories for me.
So crazy when you look back at that time period. So much going on. Terry Garvin scandal. Obviously, Pat, with that, gets suspended. Got the steroid controversy going on. You got Hogan thinking about leaving for Hollywood. You got Warrior making his way back in. You got Sid, who they're trying to build up as kind of the next Hogan. Then you got Flair in the mix. You got Macho Man coming after the title. You got so many moving parts, so many different things, and so many insane things going on. Was it a pretty hard task when Pat gets suspended and they put you in that role and boom, biggest show of the year, you're in charge?
Well, just to list the names that you mentioned, if I could drop myself at a time and place in the history of the business, that would be a time I probably would have selected by choice, just because of the players in the industry at that point. And I was accustomed to working with Pat, and the situation with basically the whole scandal had to do with Terry Garvin, who was in charge of the ring crew, and there were a bunch of young guys, and somehow a story hit the New York newspapers and talked about inappropriate things going on, and that cast a shadow over Terry Garvin. And because Terry Garvin reported to Pat, that put Pat in a tough situation. And because of all the negative publicity, there was a period of time where, basically Pat was on hiatus, not because of anything that he had done, but just because of all the negative publicity, and the fact that Terry Garvin I regarded Terry Garvin as a friend, but he had been a close friend of Pat's for many years. So it was a tough time.
When you're putting this show together and everything's coming to a head, the Royal Rumble obviously leads into it, and Ric Flair wins the world title in the best Royal Rumble match they've ever had. They haven't really been able to top it since. Such an amazing list of characters in that match. Such a great finish, obviously, with Sid throwing Hogan over. So you kind of teasing Sid Hogan there, but also kind of leading to what you think it's going to be Flair Hogan. And last week we talked about how obviously it ends up not materializing, and Hogan Flair wasn't as big as box office as you thought. You think this dream match that was supposed to happen, maybe should have happened, could have happened, Was it all the box office, or was it one of those things where it's too little, too late? As far as maybe if it was a few years earlier, could have been the headliner.
Well, in analyzing this situation after the fact, one of the arguments was that we held that match off for too long. That the fans had interest in it. We held it back and didn't give it to them, and we're not talking about a couple months. It was years. And then when we finally did it, it didn't have the luster that we all anticipated it would. But I've said this before, and I'll repeat it again, that's the uniqueness of this business. And I always regarded myself as a student of the business, a business in which you never stop learning, and that includes up to today with even with 60 plus years around the business in some capacity, whether it was from hauling the ring and refereeing up through my career to a point where I proudly have 2 Hall of Fame rings. So basically, I've done it all and seen it all, and I think I probably either met or interacted or worked for or worked with virtually anybody and everybody that's the who's who of our business. But that was it was a unique time. Terry Garvin, when we moved from Atlanta, Terry Garvin was very close to Pat, and he was running towns. And Terry kept telling me, well, Vince and Pat, your name is being thrown around because they need help, and a lot of good things are being said about you by a lot of people, and it was a situation where the circumstances, actually with WCW being sold from Crockett to the Turner organization, there were a lot of people who weren't really sure. The Turner people said all of the right things. They did due diligence and sat down with all the key players, and myself included, a real lengthy interview wanting to know about background, because they weren't all wrestling people. It was a broadcast company, and actually there were very few people in it who had actually background in the business. So they were wanting to learn as much as they could on the fly. And the question was, well, how it's not a business that you can, go and lock yourself in a room for a week with a group of people who have knowledge and experience and understand the business. I've been around it for 60 plus years. I'm still learning. And it's an ever-changing business. You think you got it all figured out, then something comes up where you realize that, oh boy, I thought I had a handle on everything, and you find that you don't. And the fans first of all, it's a talent-driven business. So if you look at the history of the business, you can go back to Lou Thez, who was the NWA champion for like a period of 25 years, which is unbelievable that one person and of course he had the amateur credentials. He was a legitimate tough guy, so it's not surprising that he was a premier player in the industry. But it's something that's a talent-driven business, and in many cases, I don't know in today's market if somebody like Lou Thez, even with all his talent and his credentials, the audience today is, fickle is not a good word, and this applies not only to wrestling, but I think everything in entertainment for sure, and in life, that they want change. They want something different. They always want something new. And I remember being on the road and in the territory days, and the fans don't understand that. Like if I was going to say Kansas City, okay, I go to Kansas City, so I got to relocate there, take my family. I got children school age, put them in school, find an apartment. You find an apartment you need to sign at least a 6-month lease, in many cases a year lease. So it's a commitment to move there, and you got to have confidence in your own ability and hope that all of the thought that you put into it and what you've heard about a particular territory, if you haven't worked there before, all comes to fruition so that you do well financially to provide for your family. And for me, I was very fortunate. Most of my moves were someplace where I would go and be able to stay for a year, which is helpful because then if it's anything shorter than that, you leave, you got to go somewhere else, you got to put deposits down on everything, and there's kids in school, there's so many aspects that the average fan doesn't realize that, that these are some of the pressure. They see you on TV, and they right away assume, oh, you're a star on television, you're incredibly popular, and the fact that we see you on TV means that you're making all kinds of money and you're rich, and that's not always the case, depending on the territory and how well business is doing. And I know of cases where business was just so-so, but there was that thing, and in my book, I think I devote a chapter to it, which I call the myth. The myth being that wrestling fans, because they see you on television, realize that, oh, you're a star, they must be paying you ridiculous sums of money, and you're rich and you're famous. And some guys, depending on where they are and where they, location-wise, and where they are in their career, a lot of guys, it's they're just making a living, and because of this image that a lot of fans have, a lot of guys would go out and, given where they were and the income that they had coming in, would go out and buy cars that, if they just looked at their budget, realized that they were going way over budget in terms of what they were paying for car payments. But many of them looked at it as, well, if I drove anything less, the fans would look at me and they'd say, oh, something's wrong. This is not the image that we thought. So a lot of guys would go, and depending on the territory, a lot of times basically come into town, have a decent run, but in the end have spent it all just living up to the image of what I call the myth.
That is such a great point. And you mentioned it being a talent-driven business, and the fans always kind of wanting change, always wanting something new. Was Vince McMahon wanting something new in '92? Like, did he want to go away from Hulk Hogan? Was Hulk Hogan really going to Hollywood? And do you think the fans wanted like somebody different than Hogan at that point? It didn't seem like it, but what do you think from the inside? Did they want Hogan gone, and was Hogan willing to be gone?
Well, I mean, Hulk wanted to do other things, and when you're at the top of this business, I think it's common to want to expand and do other things. I saw it with Dusty. Dusty, when you become a main eventer and an icon, star, with all the adjectives you want to use, when you reach that level, you can only go so high. Now you can say, okay, well, if you're a major star in Kansas City or something, if you go to New York, which has larger population centers in that geographic territory, that would be considered a step up. Where if you go there, which is why a lot of guys dreamed of the opportunity to go to New York, because if you're in Kansas City, your major town is Kansas City. But then once a month, St. Louis would run, which would be a big town, but it wasn't a weekly town. New York, if you worked in the New York territory, not only do you have Madison Square Garden every third week, but you have Boston, you have Providence, you have New Haven, you have Philadelphia, you have Pittsburgh, you have Washington, D.C. I mean, you got some big population centers that the chances of having venues where you could do well financially are much greater in the quote-unquote New York territory.
I feel like Hogan kind of did everything, and really, I mean, how much further on top can you get? Biggest star in history of business, making money hand over fist. Is that one of those things where Vince is like, okay, he's bigger than the World Wrestling Federation at that point?
My personal assessment was that Hulk was a phenomenon that doesn't come along, but maybe once in a lifetime. Vince also was someone who was a visionary, and I think I've said this in prior episodes, that it wasn't always instant success for Vince. He bought the New Haven, I think it was the New Haven Coliseum, and it went bankrupt, and he bought a hockey team, it went bankrupt. So, and this was his own money. So it took a while, but at least in the New York area, or the Northeast, I should say, you had enough major population centers that and again, it's a talent-driven business, so if you got the right talent that gets over with the people, and that's a challenge, because you never really know. You look at a Hulk Hogan, you look at a Ric Flair, you look at a Macho Man Randy Savage. These are talents that you can pretty well feel confident because of the track record they have and their work ethic, that in a big market like that, when they come in, if they get the push on TV, which obviously they're going to get because you want to maximize their impact, they're going to do business. And because they've been successful everywhere they went, if you come into a territory and they get the push, you know that it's going to help your business.
Around WrestleMania 8, there's so much going on. Like we kind of mentioned, Hogan possibly leaving. They kind of keep alluding to it being his last match, and obviously it changes, like we mentioned a few times, changes from Flair to Sid. Did you really expect that to be Hogan's last match? Was this kind of the swan song for the Hulkster?
You never know. I didn't assume that was, and at the same time, I didn't assume that it definitely wouldn't be. When you reach the epitome of your profession, as has happened with Hulk and happened with Flair, and it's human nature. People like that got to that point because they were driven, had ambition, were self-motivated, and one natural thing was with movies. And Hulk did a couple movies where he got crossover exposure and notoriety for doing well in movies. So that was a natural thing, that if you're a wrestling promoter and you have a guy that you're pushing who is a big talent, and then that talent only wants to work X number of days a month and he wants to make movies, that may be good for the talent if all of that works. But if you're in the wrestling business, you need a commitment from somebody that's basically a full-time wrestler. At least I found that out from all my experience and all my years in the business. You can't really do it on a part-time basis.
I feel like with this WrestleMania in particular, had so much going on, but the star power is just insane. And you make it a double main event: Savage versus Flair, Hogan versus Sid. Is that on purpose, as far as thinking like, okay, maybe we're losing some steam here because of all the controversies, we're really going to load the top part of the card? Or what was the kind of the thought process in making the double main event?
Well, I'm trying to think back, and to be honest with you, I've said this before joking, but it's true. I can't remember what I had for breakfast. So to think back of what my mindset was at that time, it's like if you have somebody as big as Hulk, and Hulk is talking about wanting to do other things, you don't want to get caught blindsided where all of a sudden, well, I got a chance to make a movie, and I'm leaving in 10 days, and I'm committed to that project. And it's like, well, you in this business, especially with TV and how TV bicycles around, you can't adjust to that in that quick a time without your business being impacted negatively. So Um, you're always healthiest if you can't in a promotion have there's a top level of superstars. You can't have 10 of them because then they're not all superstars. It has to be a smaller number, and you always have to be looking about the next star coming up, and if you lose one of them, who's a guy that you can elevate, that the fans have shown that there's something about them that they like, that it factor again, that you could give them an opportunity and feel pretty good that the fans would accept it and support them. Guarantee that's going to happen? Nope. But a good chance, and especially the longer you're in the business, the more experience that you have under your belt as to how territories are run and what you need to do to keep your business good. In other words, you need to have experience. You can't just step in and do it from a creative standpoint, being somebody that's behind creative, and you need some depth. You can't have, like I say, 10 superstars. You got to focus on 2, and then maybe have 2 to 4 underneath of it. And if you have a tag team, that gives you a little more flexibility, but it also ties up. If you have a tag match, then in one match you're tying up 4 marquee names, because you got a heel team that's hot. Then you need baby faces that are comparable, that people are going to want to see that match. But now that ties up 4 talent in that one match, and a lot of people never really stop to think of it that way. But if you're in charge of creative, that's the reality of how it is.
If you think about right now, as far as heading into WrestleMania, there's going to be so much influx of change. It's crazy. Piper's going to take a hiatus. Hogan is supposed to be leaving for Hollywood. Sid would soon thereafter, which is crazy. The 2 main eventers, technically main eventers, are going on last. They're both going to be gone soon. Warrior returns. Jake the Snake is going to be leaving. I mean, it's just so crazy. Did you know all this going in, that there's going to be so many moving parts as far as, okay, we're booking the card, then right after it, all this change is going to happen?
Well, the worst thing that can happen is to have wholesale changes, as you're describing, and having them all happen at one time. I would say it's virtually impossible to be able to adjust to that. You would have to do it in incremental stages to make the adjustment. And the hardest part, I always said the hardest part was baby faces too. A heel, you can bring in an Abdullah the Butcher, or you can bring in somebody that's a monster heel, and he can go out and just a lot of times say it's Abdullah the Butcher, just his physical appearance, and he goes in and destroys some people. He could become a pretty hot commodity in relatively short order. You want to balance that with somebody who's a wrestling heel that can give you more diverse matches, give you longer time. If you have Abdullah the Butcher, you can't have him going 18 minutes every night, because then he wouldn't be Abdullah the Butcher anymore. So you have to have a package to go with. And it's the other thing about guys get hurt. A guy that you feel you're committed to, he's happy where you are. You're booking him properly. He's getting over with the people. You make sure that he's properly compensated, so he's happy. But then somebody gets hurt. That's the worst thing that can happen, because if it's a serious enough, if it's a minor injury, most guys that are at that level can go out and work through it. In other words, you put them in double main events where they don't have to go real long, and the other match goes long, and it's the package until they get a chance to recover from whatever their injury is. It's why it's the most unique business in the world, because there are so many parts to the puzzle, and with that, there are so many things, therefore, that could go wrong. some of which you get blindsided for, some of which where Hulk announced that he's got a chance to make a movie, and you know that in 6 weeks he's going to be gone, and you got to make an adjustment for that. It's it can be very stressful.
I can imagine. It's crazy. So much going on. And of course, I didn't even mention yet, but the Legion of Doom, one of the most popular tag teams, of course, of that period, but of all time, they're supposed to face Money Inc. It doesn't happen. They're still on the show. Paul Ellering makes his debut for the WWF, and they just have a promo with Mean Gene. But I believe, if the rumor is correct, Hawk was suspended, so they didn't have an actual match on the show. Do you remember what happened with the Legion of Doom at that point?
I remember. I'm trying to think. It was. I remember it with Tully. I think it was Tully and Arn, and they were coming back into Atlanta when I was there. And they were an established team, and where we had all kinds of plans, and the random drug tests were a reality. It was something that. It wouldn't have had credibility if you knew well in advance when the tests were going to be and could tell the guys to be on their best behavior. If you do that, you don't really have, it's not really a legitimate drug test. So I never knew when the test was going to be, or I would know like at 4 o'clock, somebody would call and say, well, make sure you get to the building. I know you get there early, but it's real important today because when you get there, there'll be a doctor there. Okay, and I know what's going on. And when the guys came in, as soon as they walked through the door, the first thing you had to do was, have them go in and leave their sample. And it was a thing where the doctors who did it would immediately take the sample, and the first thing they would do was record the temperature. So it wasn't like a guy could have a clean specimen and keep it in a vial in his pocket and get the thing, oh, there's a drug test, and be able to switch it out. Then it wouldn't meet the proper temperature level that it would be suspect, and it's there were a lot of challenges. In other words, there was a good faith effort to keep the random drug tests as legitimate as possible. But the one situation I'm trying to think with Tully and Arn where they were coming in as a tag team. They were hot, and I want to say they're both all my friends, and I'm just talking about historic, so I'm not talking about something that wasn't known at the time. But I want to say that I think it was Tully that got flagged, and when it happens,
yes.
when it happens, it's not like, well, this will take effect in 3 weeks. It's on the spot, and so they were coming in and going to be featured. Now, if it's Tully and Arn, it diminishes Arn's value because as great a talent as Arn is, and to me, he's one of the all-time greats. But at that particular time, he was being brought in as part of that Arn Tully team, and the day they arrive, all of a sudden, Tully's on the shelf for 6 weeks, and that puts Arn in a terrible situation because he would have anticipated jumping right in a main event spot and not losing any momentum from where he came from, and now he's on ice for 6 weeks. It was very stressful for me as the person in charge of creative, stressful on Tully for him saying, well, I just used a poor judgment, and how does that affect the relationship with Arn? Because now Arn was coming in with anticipation of what they were going to do financially, and that's not going to happen for at least 6 weeks. And coming in with all the buildup, it's not like you can put the buildup on hold and have that same impact once one of the players in a team is available, and you suddenly put them out there and try and recreate, what you would have had 6 or 8 weeks ago.
Right, and that's exactly the same situation that happens with Hawk and Animal with the Legion of Doom. And, I guess Hawk got busted, still able to appear on the show and do the interview, but obviously not wrestling, cancels the plans against Bunny Inc., and it kind of builds up more towards the big SummerSlam confrontation that they're about to have. But as far as getting into the actual show, the British Bulldog versus Berserker match doesn't happen due to time constraints. It gets cut off the show. Is that something going in, that there's a couple matches that are on the fringe and they just may not happen?
I was always in charge of timing shows, which included, if you're just doing TV shows where you're recording segments, it's not as critical. But if you were doing Clash of Champions, or if you're like when we would do the TBS studio show, it would be taped, but it would be live to tape. In other words, they didn't want to have somebody at 6 o'clock being there to do edits. I mean, in other words, they treated it as you would come on the air at 2 o'clock and you would run it as if it is 6 o'clock right up till 4, and then, or 3, whatever the time was, and then the guys would run out to fly to the airport. And I remember we would go through Wendy's drive-through and get a sack of food and hit the airport and be eaten on the plane going to the town, because that's how tight the schedule was.
And with WrestleMania 8, you had Bulldog and Berserker getting cut, because it was going to be a short match anyway, but that gets cut. But then you think about the match that's right before the main event, Owen Hart and Skinner is only 1 minute and 36 seconds, so that's a short match. So when you're timing it out, is that because some of the matches went long, some of them went short? Like what happened in this particular specific show that these matches either get cut or they're cut extremely short?
I don't have a specific recollection of that particular scenario, but let's say, for example, the regular TBS show was, again, recorded live to tape, but in real time. They would have 2-minute breaks so that when it went to air, the only thing that somebody sitting there would be able to put it in, run it, and where there were commercials, they would have 2 minutes and 2 seconds of blank, but then that's somebody there could push a button with a commercial that was keyed up, and one person who was experienced at that could do it. Clash of Champions was a little bit different, and like I say, I timed everything, and what I would do, I would know who all the players were, and as an example, if there was going to be a match, and I would say to the one guy, how much, because we would give him a cue to go home. How much time do you need from getting a cue to when the 1, 2, 3 and go to a break? And some guys in good faith would say, "Oh, I only need a minute." Well, a minute is a real short period of time. Or they'd say a minute. And you learn from experience who, if a guy tells you a minute and a half, in reality it's going to be 2.5, if not 2:45. And you have to know that, so you can't take their word for it. I mean, they tell you that in good faith, because a lot of times these guys don't have a sense. Their emphasis is what's going on in the ring, when they get a cue, and sometimes things take longer than they thought. But if a guy tells you a minute and a half, and that every time you give him a minute and a half cue, it's 2.5 minutes. So then I would factor that in. And what I used to do was I would take the whole show, and there'd be a 2-hour show, and I would know I would allow, let's say, 2 minutes for the opening, a minute for the close. I would know what all the commercials were. And I would take the total commercial times, back that out of the show, and then it's a 2-hour show. I would have an actual content time of when the light came on and they're in the ring to when they would go to a break. and then I would know how many matches were involved, who the players were, and then I would sit and play with the times of you don't want to somebody that's out there that can give you a quality match for 6 minutes on TV and ask them to go 12 or 15 minutes. That nobody benefits from that. So you know who is capable of giving you a longer time, and then you learn from experience. When I say to a guy, how much Q do you need to go home? Oh, just a minute. Well, you know that a minute is actually 2.5 minutes. So you have to factor that in. I'm going to send the guy out there. Gene Anderson used to walk out in the back, just stand there with his arms folded. The referee would see Gene come out. He would buzz the guys, go home. And this is before earpieces and that kind of thing. So it was just that simple. And then I would take the whole show. I would know what the commercial time, open and close commercial time was, back that out of the show, and I would have a body of content. Then I would look at how many matches there were, and I'd start roughly allocating. I can get so many quality minutes out of this one. This one I can have go fast, and then adjust. And then I would start with a timesheet of the whole show, and then I would then start in real time, 6 o'clock, opening, first match, commercial. And so going into each commercial, I would know whether I was running long or running short, so that I didn't get blindsided all of a sudden at the end of the show with, oh my God, what am I going to do now? In other words, I knew each step of the way if I was good on time, tight on time, and to what degree. And then I could make adjustments. And I got to be very good at it. The problem was that nobody else understood what I was doing in my system, and it wasn't something that, and I didn't do that but just by design to like keep it a secret. It just was something that I did well, and I just did it without the thought, because what happened was when I left, and I think it was a Clash of the Champions that came on right after I left, and whoever was in charge of time, it ended up they ran out of time and went off the air while one match was still in the ring and not into the finish, and there was another whole match that never got to air. When I was there, that wouldn't have happened because I was I was on top of it each step of the way. But again, nobody looked over my shoulder, asked what I was doing. So I didn't, by design, like keep it a secret as a power thing, because that was never my trip. It's just that I did it, was experienced at it, confident in my system, and I could I could talk to everybody, see what the matches were, time it all out, and then I would start right at the top, 6 o'clock, and then opening is this, first match, cue to go home, go to break at this, and have and I would write the times on my run sheet, so that I always knew at the end of each match whether I was light on time or heavy on time. And a lot of times Dusty I would know who could give me quality time and who couldn't, and a lot of times guys that I thought would have a good match, and Dusty never, he trusted me to do everything and didn't worry about it. And then he would all he did was stand at the monitor, and he would look at the show, and he's just assessing in real time if it's going well or not going well, a quality show or whatever. I'm the one entrusted with all the details. And there were times where Dusty would be standing there watching, and maybe I thought two guys had chemistry and would be really good, and for whatever the reason, which you don't know, a match kind of just wasn't living up to expectations. And Dusty I would be sitting there with paper in front of me and watching a clock, and all Dusty would sit there and watch it from a fan's perspective, sitting at home. And he would be up there watching, and it didn't happen a lot, or great regularity, Dusty was standing there, and he wouldn't even turn around. He would just look, and he would say, James, how much longer do I have to look at this shit? Excuse my language. That's what he would say. And I would look down, and I would know that I needed about another minute and 20 seconds. I said, Dream, just grit your teeth. I need another minute and 20 seconds, and I can't pick it up anywhere else. If I just sent them home, I'm already stretching something else that I'm compounding the problem. Just bear with it for that extra minute, and hopefully these guys will kick it in, and it isn't as obvious. And he would never question what I was doing or how I did it. He was just looking in real time and seeing something that, because he puts the show together, match to match, and looking at it, and he's just expressing his immediate sentiments, and I'm always challenged with having to look at the big picture. But we worked together for so many years. We worked together. I went to Florida as a booker, first time ever, and did not realize, I thought that I had the ability to have good ideas, to put together a TV show, and I came to find out real quickly that there's a whole lot more to than just structuring a good TV show and having good matches. That all the successful bookers, I came to realize very quickly, whether it was Watts, whether it was Dusty, whether it was whoever, would come in to book, they would come in and they would bring with them usually 3 or 4 of their, quote unquote, their guys, their crew. So in other words, if Dusty's coming in, and I can't remember names, but if Dusty's coming in, and he would have these 4 guys come in with him, whether it's Abdullah or whatever, that's going to have impact. It's not just Dusty. It's Dusty as a talent, but it's the people that come in at the same time that all of a sudden have this impact that, wow, boy, the whole thing has a different look. It's because of the people that surrounded him. I didn't realize that at first. I thought it was more having good ideas, being able to put together a TV show, and I realized very quickly that I didn't have a crew of guys that were quote unquote my guys. I was basically pioneering a new aspect of the business, something that I felt that I could handle, do well at, but never realized that there was that component of having a crew of guys that came in with you that had a track record of success.
Now, as far as WrestleMania 8 and the card, and just kind of going back to that, just want to kind of briefly just go over it, maybe refresh your memory a little bit, and the fans as well. So at first, the first match of the evening, a dark match, the Bushwhackers, Butch and Luke, defeat the Beverly Brothers. Then the first actual match of the card, Shawn Michaels with Sensational Sherry defeats Tito Santana. The third match, but really the second match of the actual pay-per-view, Undertaker with Paul Bearer defeats Jake the Snake Roberts. Where did you think, or what did you really think of Undertaker at this point? Because he's beating a legend in Jake. Jake's going to be on his way out. Big push in store for the Undertaker?
Yeah. I when he first came into the, trying to think of where I was, that he came in, he was coming in, and the first thought, he'd been down in Pensacola, I think, and he was coming in, and it was like, okay, here's a big, impressive guy, size-wise, and he could do amazing things. He could walk the tightrope, something that very few, if any, people could do. He just did some things that were phenomenal. And so I always had good success, which I learned from I learned from everybody that I ever worked for. But what they used to do was to take somebody like Big Boss Man. He was Ray Traylor before. He was a big guy and quality worker, and they wanted to change his persona. So in talking to him, and this is back with Vince, that come to find out that he had been in law enforcement. And so it was like Vince had great success talking to somebody and finding out about their history. And then, okay, he was in law enforcement. So that meant by giving him the Big Boss Man with a nightstick, would have been a persona in the wrestling business that would have been kind of touching on part of his past, where instead of giving him something so foreign and character-wise that you hope it's going to work, you kind of increases your chances of success by having him do something that he's had some kind of experience in doing in his prior, maybe even breaking in the wrestling business. And had great success doing that. And that was something that I paid attention to as well. And any time that I ever had anybody come in anywhere, I would use that process of sitting down, talking to them, and finding out what their hobbies were, what their interests were, what they did before they got in the wrestling business. And that was a great example of that.
Yeah, definitely. And with Mark, a.k.a. Mark Calloway, a.k.a. The Undertaker, was he, did he have some sort of, dark background and dark past? Or you just thought, or Vince kind of thought this was a great gimmick, he'll be perfect for it, it'll just work great with him? Yeah,
and what Vince would do, too, he would have interesting, first Vince's first thought was, I think I'm going to maybe have him be a Viking, with the helmet, with the horns coming out of it. And not saying that Mark couldn't have made that work, but in talking to him, it just, and I forget what the connection was with whether he had worked in a funeral home or something, but anyway, the Undertaker thing, and I remember, and it was a fine line too, because when we unveiled him, the music was designed for him. Da, 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 da. It was like a funeral thing, and he dropped from the ceiling down at the top of the entrance ramp. And as I remember watching it, he looked like, which was my worst fear at that moment, he looked like a representation of Jesus Christ on the cross coming down from the ceiling. And I thought, oh, wow. If anybody starts to connect a situation where that's how they see it, it may leave a bad taste or a negative reaction to these people, which thank God, never happened. He come down and it was different. The music was great, and what was so amazing, and I'm amazed to this day, that he got such great reaction doing less. And I remember the impact where they would do something to him. He'd be laid out in the ring, and all of a sudden he would sit up like a dead man walking. He would be like a corpse that came alive. He would sit up, and the people would just go, oh! The effect was just unreal. And he's one of the greatest characters I think I ever saw come together in this business. And of course, he had to make it work, and he did make it work. And again, I think the amazing part of it is that how little he did. What he did well, and he knew when to do it. And even now, as I look back, he's one of the great characters in our industry, and I'm happy that I even had a small part to play in it.
And this is kind of like just the beginning for him. Basically, the year before beats Snuka at WrestleMania, and then this year beats Jake, and it starts his obviously huge run that he's about to make. Now, the next match is quite possibly the match of the night: Bret Hart versus Roddy Piper for the Intercontinental Championship. Bret Hart, of course, wins and wins the title. But I think a little bit of controversy in the match surrounding Bret's bleeding. So quite possibly his blading, so to speak. Did you notice that, or did he get any sort of trouble with it? Did Vince notice it? Was there any sort of maybe fine for blading?
I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I can't remember what I had for breakfast. If you ask me, I'm I'm reacting to the information that you're giving me match by match. If you had said, well, Pat was on hiatus, he was gone, and you had worked hand in hand with Vince, you booked the card for Indianapolis, and that was your baby. So I guess you could say that put a lot of pressure on you. Was, how much input did you have with the success up to that point? Because now Pat's not here. It's you with Vince. So if that show had fallen flat on its face, I think it would have put a pin in the balloon of what would have been my stock. Thank goodness, put a lot of thought into it, and it was just Vince and I, and I put the card together, and it was a work in progress, and it just, I guess because I paid attention all those years, that was it risky? Yeah. Did I have moments that I was like crossing my fingers behind my back? Yes. But not to say that I never ever overestimated my ability and my contributions. And by the same token, I never underestimated it either. I realized how long I'd been in the business, that all the territories I worked on top everywhere and did extremely well. I could interview. My managerial career was something that happened by accident. And then I was in Florida I know we're skipping around here, but I was in Florida at the time, had just gone into Florida, with Roger Kirby as a tag team, and Archie Goldie, the Mongolian Stomper, was there, as was Bearcat Wright, and they were going to Tennessee with Bearcat being Archie's manager. They weren't going 2 weeks, and because I had known Archie from the little time we were together in Florida, and had known him from when I got my break up in the Maritimes, and they would bring back the guys that had been on top prior seasons, and you're the new guy for the season, but all the old guys that had whole season runs before are now coming back to test you, and that was part of being able to establish you. So I knew Archie from that scenario. So he goes to Tennessee with Bearcat. 2 weeks go by. Phone rings one day. And he says, Archie, what's up? Oh, man, he said, I came up here to Tennessee. I moved. And he said, the thing with Bearcat just, man, it was a miserable failure. Sounded good on paper. I felt good about it when I came here. It got so bad the Bearcat left, and so for a week I had no choice to do my own promos, and that just killed my gimmick. First of all, the thing from being with Bearcat and then having no manager and doing my own promos, which worked for him. He was a good promo guy. He had a couple credible runs up in Calgary as a talent. But he had now become established in the business as this monster that you never heard speak, and had this image. And the minute that he spoke, it just, And so he said, I got to go. I have to get out of here. I said, it all fell apart. And he said, I've made a couple phone calls, And he said, one of which is I've called Dallas, where Red Bastien is the booker for Fritz von Erich, and I can leave and immediately, because everything in this business is timing, right place, the right time. And his call to them was, hey, this is Archie Goldie, and they were ecstatic about getting a call from him, and to have him come in, and knowing that it would give the territory a boost. But he said, I need a manager. And this is Archie telling me. And he said, I listened to your interviews up in the Maritimes when you were up there getting your break, and I came back in for those 3 weeks, and he said, you've become one of the best interview guys in the business. And then when I went to Florida, I saw that as well. And he said, so if I have to leave Tennessee and I've got a main event spot in Dallas, but I need a manager, he said, that's the reason I'm calling you. Because he said, I think this is just one of those opportunities that you can't see coming, comes along. And he said, I have confidence that you will be a great manager, and we can step in to a top spot in Dallas. So, wow. So now it's like never had ever given any thought to being a manager. So I said, well, first thing is, and leisure suits were very popular at that point. And I said, I guess I could go over here to the store and get a couple leisure suits so that I can dress the part, and I'm sure that I can do it, and I can be everything that you want it to be. And he said, well, if I didn't have confidence that you were the guy that I would want, he said, I wouldn't have made this call in the first place. And, well, I appreciate the high praise that you're giving me, and that you have that much confidence knowing that you've got a great opportunity, need the manager, and have handpicked me to be the guy. So that was the deal. We went into Dallas, and I bought some leisure suits. I went in as his manager and just exploded the territory. So, again, right place, right time, and went in there. And what was interesting is Archie could be very temperamental, and he sometimes it could be a sunny day outside, and Archie would be sitting out there looking, and he could convince himself sitting there looking up, oh, geez, I look at a couple clouds over there. I sense that some clouds are coming in, and it's going to rain. And you'd sit there and you'd say, what? But he would take a situation and just talk himself into a bad situation. It was unbelievable. And I never was able to analyze what it was, but it just, other than Archie was his own worst enemy. He would take a situation, and we got to Dallas, and it was like, they don't really have any plans for us. It isn't going to work out here. And that was not the case, but that was his immediate assessment. And what would happen is, he had started in the business in Calgary, and Stu Hart loved him. And he could go back to Calgary without any prior notice and step in and immediately impact the territory. So when things got bad, first thing he'd do was call Stu. Stu said, come in, you'll be on TV Saturday, we're off and running. So all of a sudden, Red Bastien calls me and he says, I tried calling Archie, and he said the phone just rings, and nobody answers. I said, he might have been out. I don't think he has an answering machine. He might have gone. I'll go over to the house and knock on the door. I go over to the house that he had rented, and I look in the windows are all up, the shades are all up, and I look and I see nothing. So I walk around the back of the house. I'm looking in the bedroom windows. Oh my God, the place is empty. He's left. And so I called Red and I said, I said, I went by hopefully to see Archie and kind of whatever was bothering him, bring him down and get everything straight. And I said, and it looks to me like he's just up and left town. Oh man. So they had called, I guess they had a call from Lonnie Main, who was out in Portland, and putting some feelers out, getting ready to leave. And basically they called Lonnie and said, this whole situation happened with Archie. You could be here tomorrow. You got a main event spot, and we'll give you the push. And he said, I need a manager. And they said, we got a manager here. And he said, we'll run with it. I'm sure you'll be happy with him, because I don't think I'd ever met him. So that's what happened. He came in, and we immediately off and running, and had a great run. And I ended up staying there a couple of years and managing several different guys, because once you'd established yourself as a manager, it was kind of a shortcut to then have somebody come in, and immediately you're their manager, and they're immediately a marquee player. So I ended up having a hell of a run there. And my first, when I go back months before that with a phone call from Archie about managing part of my potential career that I had never given any thought to. And just, again, it's sheer luck of being in the right place at the right time, and being given the ball and running with it, and have it all work out.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, kind of getting back to the card itself, we were saying, you didn't remember about the blading. Brett actually does blade in the match with Piper. Somewhat controversial, I guess, because there's really no blading and no blood at this point. But great match.
Some states. In the meantime, I know in Maryland passed a law that if the minute there was, because there's commissioners there, and the minute there was any blood, the match would be stopped immediately. So even if if somebody went down and accidentally hit their head and bled, the commissioner would then call for the bell, stop the match, even if it was a dead point in the match. So it was a law that the commission had passed in Baltimore, and it was like, hey, there is no blood, which was not a bad thing. It was actually a good thing, because when you think about it, guys that bleed, and your blood, like Krupp used to put the claw on, and you would bleed, and he's got the claw on, and then eventually you come up, and now all that blood is going into his face, in his eyes, in his mouth. I mean, it's, when you think about it, somebody from the medical profession would be horrified with the potential of through bloodborne things, of passing something from one person to another. At that point, we just were thinking about the match and getting Impact and doing something that would just get the people extra excited, not thinking of the any medical risks. Because if anybody sees me up close, and I was very, like, King Curtis had these deep grooves down his head.
Yep.
Dusty had them. And I think I bled probably as much as anybody, and all of mine were right just up by my hairline on the one side, and I stayed in that one spot. And over a period of time, I mean, if you look closely, you could see the scars, but they're all not there. They would be with my frown lines, and you'd still look at them and say, oh yeah, if you look close, you'd see them. And I just, it was just part of the business at that period of time. But I'm not disfigured for life. All my wives will probably tell you what an incredibly handsome man I am. I'm just joking, but.
And the kind of the rest of the card, just to run it down: Bossman, Duggan, Slaughter, and Virgil defeat the Mountie, the Nasty Boys, and the Repo Man. Not a very long match, pretty short match, about 6 minutes, 7 minutes or so. The next match, the WWF World Heavyweight Championship, Randy Macho Man Savage with Miss Elizabeth defeat Ric Flair with Mr. Perfect. Great match. Between this and Bret Hart and Piper, I mean, those are the two matches of the night. Just awesome, memorable, great match. And a little bit of controversy as well, a little blade job as well. Like we just talked about, bleeding and getting in trouble for it, and maybe fines, or maybe different states have different rules. But a little bit of controversy with the whole picture thing with Miss Elizabeth, and Flair saying that he's going to show some stuff, and Macho Man playing on his bitterness and jealousy and stuff like that. Was that, especially for that time period in WWF at this point being PG, was that a little bit kind of a racy angle to do, like Flair basically teasing some nudes and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, but it never got it. It's one thing to talk about it; it's another one to actually do it. So, was it controversial? Yes, but it was something that, because again, we were trying to appeal to young people. You didn't want to exclude your audience, and once you got into that thing. Because Miss Elizabeth was she was one of the most beautiful women that I ever saw in my life. She was she was a knock-dead gorgeous woman.
No doubt about it.
She was great in that role. She and Randy were, God, they were great. In fact, one of the main events in Madison Square Garden was that Randy and Liz were getting married in the ring at Madison Square Garden. That was the main event for that show. And I remember we were on the Garden Network, and I don't remember, Randy went first, and because everything he did, he was a showman extraordinaire. And then Elizabeth got the big entrance, but then once they got in there, the ceremony was very quick. And it wasn't a lot of action, so it wasn't something that could have just been dragged on indefinitely. So it was the last match to go on. And I remember we were on the Garden Network that was live and going off the air at 11 o'clock. And Randy got out there, and, of course, he was the super showman. She goes out there, and they finally, I think, oh, my God, I'm watching the clock, and I'm thinking, get the ceremony in, and they finally got the ceremony in, and then the coup de grace, or where he's finally going to kiss the bride, and that was going to be the big pop. And Randy's going around, he's looking at the people, and I'm thinking, Randy, don't do this to me. I'm looking at my watch, and thinking, oh my God, we're going to go off the air before he kisses the bride. And I remember, then there was nothing I could do. I couldn't go out there and signal him, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. I just had to, God, it's one of those moments that still burn in my brain as one of the high pressure moments. And all the matches and all the things you've been in, the highest pressure is being in Madison Square Garden on live network, and you're worried about running out of time after the wedding before he kisses the bride. Yes, I absolutely am. And he finally dips her and gives her the kiss and dips her with about between 5 and 10 seconds left before they actually went off the air. Oh,
crazy.
That was crazy and stressful. But what a pop. Oh, my God, what a pop.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Very memorable. SummerSlam 91 at MSG. The match made in heaven, the match made in hell. Such a great thing. But this specific match with Savage and Flair is just a classic. Anybody obviously hasn't seen it should definitely go out of the way to see it, along with Brad Piper. Just to kind of round out the card, Tatanka defeats Rick the Model Martel. The Natural Disasters defeat Money Incorporated. The like I mentioned earlier, a very short match. Owen Hart defeats the Skinner, and of course, the immortal Hulk Hogan in his quote-unquote last WWF match defeats Sid Justice by disqualification. But if you remember, Papa Shango comes down, and it seems like he misses his cue because Hogan hits the leg drop, and Sid actually has to kick out.
He's late getting there, yeah.
Yep. Was that one of those things where you're just so mad that he was late getting there? It's such a kind of a long way to the ring. What was your thought process at that point?
it was frustrating and it's hard to, because of the distance from behind. It's you think you could time something, and it's hard in a live show like that in a big arena, 20,000 people, 24,000 people sold out. And,
oh no, 60,000 plus.
Okay. Yeah. All right, you're there, and it's in Madison Square Garden, and it's like, man, this is the big time. It doesn't get any bigger than this, and it's, the wedding and the ring, and that was all different than, if it's a match, you can end a match quickly or whatever. But in this case, the whole presentation was just much more involved, and basically almost, in fact, I would make a case that it was totally out of my control, out of my hands. I could send people out there thinking they had enough time and allow a little cushion. Then all of a sudden, because of how Randy is, he would go and, oh my God. And it's like when the thing took place, thinking that the wedding is one thing, but the final thing after the wedding is you kiss the bride. And that was going to be hopefully how we would time it down to be able to, to go off the air, and the network was live. And I remember being a nervous wreck. It finally got down there, the wedding was happening, and then the music is playing and the time is going down. We're about to go off the air, and he hasn't kissed the bride, and I'm thinking, oh God, that's the cream on the cake. We got to see that spot, and finally he did. And seconds later, we went off the air. It was one of those highly stressful moments, but also an exciting moment too, to be able to have a wedding and be a main event and have that place sold out. But Randy was over. My God, he was over, and she was too. She was over too. She was big time.
And he at that point, I mean, they nailed their cue. But as far as WrestleMania 8 and Papa Shango, he misses his cue, right? I mean, he kind of screws up the finish of the match with Hogan. No one kicks out of the leg drop. Sid's forced to kick out of the leg drop at that point because Papa Shango a little bit late getting to the ring.
Those are that is a problem when a finish like that is dependent on somebody having to run from the back and be there between the 2 and 3 count to get the maximum impact. And, you think you've got it timed out and the guy can get there in such and such a time. And it just, those are the things that will, I have gray hair. And if I didn't, that would have caused me to be prematurely gray. But those are the things that really make professional wrestling the most fascinating business in the world, is all these little things. And it was, what year would that have been?
1992.
Okay, 92. So that's 8 and 9. That's 27 years ago. It seems like it was yesterday. 27 years ago. But that's a moment that's going to be embedded in time, and I know there are fans that will remember, because it wasn't just a match. There was something more. It was something bigger than that, and the people that were there will remember that they were there. And it's just, I'm excited just with us talking about it and remembering that, running to the ring, somebody running to the ring and worried about them being late and about to go off the air after the wedding, and having the wedding is one thing, but then, the wedding isn't complete till the groom kisses the bride. And it's a live TV show, live network. They're about to go off the air. The music is playing. Please, Randy, God damn it, kiss the bride. And he did right before we went off the air. Oh.
Now, with WrestleMania 8 and the finish, we were talking about, Hogan, Sid. Hogan wins via disqualification. and Papa Shango obviously screws up the finish a little bit, but they kind of both are double teaming Hogan. Then the surprise return of the Ultimate Warrior, huge pop, almost doesn't look like the Warrior. He looks a little bit skinnier. He's got a little bit of haircut, still huge pop. The music is great. He ran all the way down the huge, mile-long entranceway, all the way to the ring, beats up Papa Shango, and Sid. Great pop, great way to end the show with Hogan and Warrior. Shocking to have Warrior come back. And did you hear the same thing that so many people said? Like, oh, that's not the Ultimate Warrior. That's a different guy playing because he was skinnier and did have a haircut.
Yeah, but once he got into the ring, and the streamers off of his biceps, there was, in a case like that, you're protective of that persona. So nobody else would have, guys have since, but at that time, nobody else had the things around the biceps with the streamers down. And he would run to the ring, he would run back and forth, then he would stop and inside the ring, and he would shake the ring ropes and jump up and down. I mean, he just did things that were distinctively his. I get excited. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it, because it was a time where, you were mentioning all those people that were on the card that night, and I sometimes forget how, from a creative standpoint, that you had such depth of talent to be able to work with. And that doesn't, no knock on today's talent, but I can't think of a recent scenario where you have a talent roster with that kind of depth, that were just, because of television, we're all over. And that makes it a little, no guarantee, because you still have to put things together that excite the people that they want to see. But it sure helps if you've got good talent to work with. I would say great talent, not good talent, great talent, exceptional talent.
Unbelievable talent roster, and I think that's just kind of a great stopping point as far as WrestleMania 8, because we went through the whole card, all the unbelievable talent. It talked about everybody. The aftermath and some of the things that went on, we'll definitely talk to in the upcoming weeks. We'll talk to you about the steroid scandal, Jerry Jarrett coming in, all these different things. But I mean, WrestleMania 8, I loved it. I thought you did a great job. What would you kind of say? Thumbs up for it, that you did a good job and Vince was happy with it overall?
Well, I always have put a lot of pressure on myself. I have confidence in my ability, but there are so many things that could go wrong, that until you see whatever your plan was unfold and everybody played their part up to what you anticipated that they would, that the response from the crowd was everything, because that's another thing. You a lot of times you think that something is going to just ignite the crowd, that for some reason that you don't understand, that you don't get that response. And then there's another time that you have something out there as kind of like, well, I'm going to put these two guys together just because I don't have a program for them at the moment, and I want to keep them good, so I'm going to put them together. And they end up going out there and basically stealing the show every night, because there's some chemistry between them and something in the audience that sees that just elevates that to far beyond what you ever imagined. And that's what, again, makes this business so unique, that if I had a book to say, okay, you want to be a success in the wrestling profession, you need this guy that looks like this and does that, you need this guy over here, and then you put them together and do that. No. You might as well trash that book, because it wouldn't be worth the pages that it's printed on, because the ultimate judge and jury are the people that sit out there in the audience. And one great example of this was, we held off with Hulk and Flair, wanting that. It was kind of like a dream match that we thought everybody wanted to see, and we held off putting the two of them together. And our thinking was, this is going to just increase the anticipation and the intensity when they did come together. And when they did come together, to our surprise, to our shock, we did not get the response that we thought we were going to get. And so we then had to suddenly look where we thought this thing was going to run for 6 months to a year. It would be lucky to go 2 months. Never could have anticipated that. And to this day, I don't understand why. But again, that's what makes this such a unique profession, that if we all could figure it out that easily, I wouldn't be sitting here now with you in an apartment. I'd probably be sitting in a mansion on the top of a hill. Not that I'm not happy where I am, because I am. I'm perfectly happy. But, if it was easy, anybody could do it. It's not easy, and that's why it takes special people with special skills, with a lot of help from other people. And I've had my share of success, but I also am the first to say that I certainly didn't do it on my own. I was never the biggest, never the best, never the smartest, but nobody loved the business more than I did, or was willing to work any harder than I was. And because of that, I had a lot of people help me along the way. And when I look back, sometimes I just, in the quiet, if I've been out somewhere at a social function and I come back, normally I don't wear my Hall of Fame rings around the house, but I come back in and just sit down for a minute and just look at that, and it's, God, Hall of Fame ring. To me, that was baseball in Cooperstown back in those days. And Hall of Fame only came along much later. And it really is a very humbling experience. I remember 2012 going to Miami at Wrestlemania when the Horsemen were inducted into the Hall of Fame, and getting that ring, and then at the outdoor stadium, looking up with 40, 50, 60,000, whatever there. It was sold out with a lot of people. And we came out, and they had stars on the stage, and we all came out. And just, even then, I wasn't prepared for the impromptu response that we got from the people. And I remember looking up, at the upper level of the bowl, where I could still see people that were not at the far end, people that I couldn't see. But up at the top, I could see. And I distinctly remember looking up there and seeing everybody holding up the symbol of excellence, holding up 4 fingers, and thinking, wow, what a magical time this is. And I wish this moment could last forever.
I love it.